As FPMT celebrates 50 years, it's indeed a great honour to have this opportunity to be able to interview Venerable Roger Kunsang, the Executive Director, who has, to share his wisdom from a lifetime of service to FPMT and in particular to Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So this year also marks 50 years of Venerable Roger's life in ordination, and that's a great inspiration to the monks and nuns of IMI and to FPMT internationally. Venerable Roger, we'd love to capture the key to your longevity of ordination for over half a century. So looking back, what was it that brought you to the Dharma?
Well, there's a long story and a short story to that. Um, I think I think generally just maybe in teenage years, dissatisfaction with what generally people felt was brought a happy life, brought happiness, right? So I didn't feel, I didn't feel that was working at all for me in the from a conventional point of view of what people thought brought happiness. Yeah, that's the short story.
We don't mind long. Okay, so, and then how did it come about that you ordained?
Well, I guess that was the begin. Well, it started with, you know, what made me. So I started from the fact that I started to realize things weren't making me happy, that it generally appeared to make other people happy. Um, I sort of started a search of, so I sort of decided that if something's not going to make me happy, why do it? So then gradually over time, uh, basically everything I stopped doing. Um, yeah, literally everything that conventionally people thought made you happy. Um, from my analysis, from my simple analysis and my commitment, I stopped doing everything. So, um, so then the big thing was just what made me happy. What made me happy? What was the cause of happiness? You know, and I think then I, th I one day I was somewhere I think I was in the US no, I don't know where I was. Anyway, one day I said to myself, I sort of came to the conclusion somehow that, if I focus on helping other people and it's really sincere, um, that that made that seemed to be something I couldn't break down. That was something quite significant, I felt. So then immediately, by that time I was about 19 or 20 or something, and I think I was in the US or Canada. And anyway, so then immediately I thought, well, the work I do should be what brings people happiness. So I thought, well, it's too late to think about being a doctor, um, because, the immediate benefit that doctors bring, especially to children, I was thinking. And then, so I did start some volunteer work in a hospital in America, in the US, I think. Yeah, it was in the US. I started some volunteer work, um, or it might have been Canada. Anyway, uh, and not too long after starting that, I could see that kids would come in and doctors would fix them up physically, but they weren't necessarily happy. And so then I thought, okay, it's the mind that's the problem, and I thought I'll become a psychologist. So then I read a few books on psychology, and that settled things very quickly that they were sort of didn't really know. They weren't really sure about what they were doing. at that time anyway. Um, so so that dismissed psychology, um, and then at that time I was maybe around 20 years old. I was actually living in Canada at that time, and then I decided uh, to become vegetarian, and so that don't contribute in any way to hurting animals. And so I was actually in a vegetarian restaurant uh, in Toronto, which was the restaurant was in the base of a university there. Anyway, so it was winter time. I came out of the restaurant and there was a huge blast of wind that ripped everything off the notice board and then one piece of paper stuck on my chest as I tried to close the door and get away, and I pulled it off. And then it was an advertisement for Swami Shantananda, who was coming to Canada for the first time, and he was going to give yoga classes and teach meditation. So then immediately I thought, oh, meditation, control my mind. That seemed to be the next obvious thing to try. So then, so anyway, I spent about 6 weeks, just going regularly to his yoga classes. And he seemed to think that I think by the end of that 6 weeks, he made the suggestion to me. He said, "You're interested in yoga and meditation. Why don't you go to India to, my master's, uh, uh, to his master's ashram?" His Anyway, his master was a very famous yogi, but had passed away, and his main monastery or ashram was in Rishikesh. So then I took the trip. I got to England and hitchhiked through, you know, usual thing, made my way to India, and went to Rishikesh and to the ashram. And the ashram was a nice ashram, but there was not anybody there teaching. And yoga in a sense, yes, but more the mental part of disciplining the mind or controlling the mind, how to meditate. There was nobody there. So some of the people there, the Indian swamis and that, said you should go up in the mountains, high up above Rishikesh, and there's many yogis in caves and things like that. They said, and ask you questions. So I did that, went up, and was up there. I don't know, I can't remember, some many days or some weeks, I don't know. And then I finally came across one Swami who was in a cave. His name was Swami Shantananda. Uh, no, oh, no, not Swami Shantananda. Tutwala Baba. Tutwala Baba, his name was. And he was sitting in a cave, completely naked, long hair way down to the ground and along the ground. He'd been in there 23 years, no food, no sleep, like that, right? And he was, prior to that, he was in the army. He was an engineer. He was an officer in the army. So it was the Indian British Army at that time. So anyway, he decided to renounce life and went into this cave, and anyway, he'd been there in this particular cave that I'd heard anyway for about 23 years. And most of those years, in recent years, no food, no water, nothing. He was in some kind of samadhi. So I kept bothering him with questions, and uh, he would always say, I'll give you a mantra. And then I come up with questions, and then he'd say, give me a mantra. And I come up with more questions. And then in the end, one time when I met him after a few days, I think he said to me, he said, "Well, you better Buddhism," right? So then I said, okay. So then I went down the mountain to the ashram, and there on the pole was a poster, two Tibetan lamas teaching at Kopan Monastery for 1 month meditation course. So then I went off there, and that was my connection. I think the 6th meditation course, April 74. So that was the how it came to be to Kopan. Yeah, and then actually by that time I was really really bent on understanding the mind and not getting very satisfying answers. And then Rinpoche started teaching, and then all the answers started to come, and I had no idea of about Buddhism whatsoever. But Rinpoche, I think that course mostly was teaching 8 worldly dharmas and suffering of the lower realms, etc., like that. So I got a full dose of it.
Yeah.
What was the question?
And how did you come to ordain?
Oh, I see.
How did
So
that come
then,
about?
sorry, that's right. So that was the introduction, right? So then what happened was, once that was 1 month at the meditation course, and I got out of there quite quickly because although it was extremely beneficial, my self-cherishing mind just wanted to leave, grasping at all sorts of things. Anyway, so then I continued my trip, and I eventually went back to Australia because it'd been some years away. And then I got a call from, I think, Nick Rebush, who was in Nepal, and he said Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche are coming to Australia for the first time. They wanted to have a house where they could do retreat. For the idea was Rinpoche do retreat for 2 weeks while Lama Yeshe taught a course. Then Rinpoche would teach a course for 2 weeks, and Lama Yeshe would do retreat. So my job was to find a retreat, rent a house somewhere outside of Sydney, so that the retreat could happen. So the first, it was Rinpoche first who did retreat, and so then my job was to cook and clean, that sort of thing, while Rinpoche did retreat. And so I'd only done 1 month meditation course right at Kopan, and that was my full experience of Buddhism or Dharma. And so during that 2 weeks of retreat, what kept coming up in my mind, where I don't know where it came from, be a monk, be a monk. That thought just kept rising, be a monk. I still didn't understand much about Dharma or Buddhism, never mind what a monk was. I really had no idea, but the thought kept persisting. And so at the end of the retreat, I think I mentioned to Rinpoche, and Rinpoche said to ask Lama Yeshe. So I did eventually get to ask Lama Yeshe, and he said, "Oh, yes, dear, you must, oh, yes, become a monk. You can go to Nepal straight away and then become ordained." So that's sort of the short story. Maybe that was a long story.
Oh, so wonderful. And as you said, you really didn't know what it was to be a monk. So
No idea.
so what sort of things have you wished that you understood, earlier on in the journey that you've learnt, subsequently that has been of benefit?
Um, I think at that time, I think Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe being with them, um, they sort of a little bit like being thrown in the deep end. Um, and so there wasn't a lot of, I think it was just those times, there wasn't much questioning uh, from my side about being a monk, although I didn't know what a monk really was. I didn't know any the vows or anything like that. So I was only there a short time, and I think maybe a short time, and then Lama Yeshe gave rabjung. He was offering rabjung to somebody to ask, I think. So I took rabjung, and then before I knew it, Rinpoche said to go to Dharamsala and take getsul ordination. From that was that at that time, His Holiness wasn't giving initiation. Uh, he wasn't giving vows at that time, ordaining. It was Trijang Rinpoche and His Eminence Ling Rinpoche, the previous Ling Rinpoche and the previous Trijang Rinpoche. So then I took vows from Trijang Rinpoche, and Rinpoche was there, Lama Yeshe was there, and just after I took the getsul, I was talking to Rinpoche, and he said, "Oh, in 3 days' time, Ling Rinpoche is giving gelong ordination. You should do that." And I still didn't know what I was doing. So, and then in a very short time, I ended up with gelong ordination. So there wasn't too much experience before that. But looking back on the situation, I think from what I've learned, which is probably the wrong way around. Well, I can't say the wrong way around because I was following the advice of Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, but um, to be more able to adapt to the lifestyle and the vows, I think one's familiarity with Lam Rim, I think, is critical. Not just the intellectual understanding of it, but actually meditating on and putting into practice the Lam Rim. The more you can do that, the safer you are, because the main thing when you get ordained, or even before you get ordained, but when you're ordained, the main thing that you're up against to keeping the vows is attachment, right? That's usually, I think, generally the main enemy. That was my main enemy, was attachment, and it can come at times very strong, very strong. And the only way to deal with that is having had already some experience of Lam Rim, or then or otherwise you just rely on your karma. But I think the Lam Rim is really quite critical. Yeah.
So, what would you say have been some significant benefits of living in ordination then?
I think, well, from my point of view, I think I don't know where my life would have went without ordination. It was already a bit crazy. So yeah, I think that it would have been a life. Well, like maybe I would have connected with Dharma and not become a monk. So I can't say this completely, but I think without just not being able to deal with attachment, basically your life's a disaster. That it's as simple as that. You might think you're having a good time to time, but basically it's a disaster, and then before you know it, it's the end of your life. And yeah, before you know it, you're dead, and it's a waste. I can't hear you if you're talking. Your voice is gone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. So, what would you say are some of the challenges that Westerners should be aware of, maybe before considering ordination then? Or even as they go along in ordination? You've mentioned that in terms of attachment, for example.
Yeah, well, attachment is a big thing. Attachment is a big thing, and I think so. I think if you, it's a bit difficult just to rely on karma, and so from that perspective, I would say that again, coming back to the fact that um, you know, having choosing your teacher carefully. If you can to receive sort of experiential teachings, in the sense, like Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe will give, that's coming from their actual experience. So the, there is generally a stronger benefit because it touches you more deeply, right, than somebody just teaching intellectually. So, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example. So I think choosing your teacher wisely and somebody who's, I think, ideally coming from, they teach from their heart, they teach from their experience at practicing the path. I think that way you stand a chance. Otherwise, especially if you get ordained younger, you're you're definitely going to face some stiff challenges. And then on the basis of the right teacher, you have to pick the right environment, right? If you're just going to hang out in samsara, so to speak, I mean, if you're just going to hang out in normal situations, that's just, for most of us, it will make it too difficult. You might have the teachings, but the conditions that arise just can overwhelm you. Right? So I think then the conditions, so being in a monastery or a Dharma center, I think is quite critical. Unless you're older when you get ordained, and you've gone through samsara, so to speak, and you're more settled, then maybe not so bad.
And so, what about given the longevity of your ordination, for those who have been ordained a longer time, is there any specific advice for continuing on in ordination, whether those questions have arisen later on?
Arisen later on, meaning?
Meaning there are people who disrobe after even 30 years or so. So, is there any other advice that you can give?
Um, I mean, I think, keeping your ordination is, one thing is having the karma there, right? The good karma for the ordination to last. And then I think dealing with the conditions is, your environment, and then your teacher first, and then the environment. So the environment is not something that's attacking you all the time, but something that you can rely on and will support you when difficult times arise, And that environment means, the physical environment, meaning especially, having other ordained people around you, and or Dharma, lay people who are, really sincerely putting the teachings into practice. And and of course, teachers teaching. That's what, I think those are the conditions, right? and still for many of us becomes hard, and still we don't survive, right? It's not easy, especially in these times. And then also most of the non-Tibetans or non-Nepalese, non-Indians, sort of end up living in the Western world. And so that makes it even more difficult or more of a challenge, because usually it's not a Buddhist country. So you have other conditions or circumstances that are coming at you and not at all helpful. I think there's no magic answers in this situation. It generally, unless you've got a lot of good karma, it's hard. It's hard.
Well, Venerable Roger, for somebody who has a bucket load of good karma, it would seem. Thank you so very much for sharing your
Oh,
wisdom and your experience. And please, please add some more.
well, no, sorry. I'm saying what just to mention anyway. My life as a monk hasn't been easy. It's been struggle. It's been hard at times. You know, seriously hard at times. But I never wanted to give up the ordination. But certainly with plenty of challenges and issues. Lots of tests.
Thank you very much for sharing that and for sharing your experience. And again, it's a great milestone to have 50 years of ordination, and may you continue to live long. Okay, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.